Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. It is evident that both teams want to decrease crime rates, especially in areas where death rate is also high, along with the high crime rate. The amount of casualties are super high. The most likely mechanism that ensures fast and accurate prediction is the use of data-driven policing. The likely model of this technology is threefold. One, most likely police departments take into account performance by the amount of case solved and amount of crimes prevented. And this performance is tightly associated with the accuracy of the data-driven policing. So most likely you want a super accurate information. You can have this by having and receiving vast amount of data from public CCTVs, police individual cameras, identifying the characteristics and probability of doing crime based on their characteristics, attribution, educational and social background, and behavioral science in general. You can also get data samples from psychological and criminology study institutions regarding human behaviors and characteristics, their people's personal records on individuals living in those areas, their mental, physical, financial, and educational records. Second, to prevent misuse of data so that the perpetrators don't know that the police are looking for them, making sure that we can store that in the safe government administered data storage, and for on-site agents, they should only receive conclusion of predictions to ensure that you don't misuse a specific information regarding a person or a group of people, and to prevent biases that can decrease the amount of inaccuracy. We want to probably the most likely way for you to prevent that is using diverse engineers to engineer the data science behind the technology. Lastly, during investigation on individuals that are suspected to do a crime in the future or has done a crime and being investigated, we can gather even more evidence to strengthen state's case against them in the court of law. I'm going to talk about two arguments. One, how this technology exclusively can solve crimes that are extremely hard to solve in status quo. Secondly, regarding security and privacy, how people view them and why this usage of data-driven policing wouldn't bother anyone. First argument, the technology is unique in solving crimes that are extremely hard to solve. One, especially on fast-paced crime, like mass shootings, robbery, armed assaults, where the crime done very imminently, so it's very difficult to actually capture individuals on site because there's a delay from calling 911 to actually decide. Secondly, the perpetrators can run very easily to another area, which one makes it difficult for the police department because they don't have jurisdiction over said area, and secondly makes it difficult for the police departments to actually gather data for the investigation, making it impossible to do anything regarding the perpetrators. Secondly, on crimes that are difficult to get witnesses, such as crimes that are hard to identify the disguises on, the crimes that often intimidate people because they are a gang, or the crimes are organized and structural. For example, drug cartels dealing around the neighborhood, which makes it impossible for police departments just to knock on people's door and ask questions because the people are already shut down by the gang and paid huge amount of money not to tell on these gangs. Comparatively, with this technology, we can figure out patterns of attacks, and if it's at random, then behaviors of the possible perpetrators, their clothing that are attributed to them, tattoos, hairstyle, they are closely associated with. This is much more accurate than the status quo mechanism where agents go on ground to do research on niche cases for several reasons. One, obvious limited human resources in this area. The amount of police agents in comparison to people doing crimes is so imbalanced and not proportional. Secondly, most likely these departments are already overwhelmed by having to deal with high rates of crimes every day, from petty to organized ones. Lastly, people are highly stressed, especially agents that work on ground. Realistically, they're mentally unfit to figure out whether or not someone is suspected to do a crime, especially when their information that they know regarding certain attribution is incredibly limited in comparison to the data-driven policing, because the technology already gather information from vast millions of information. Secondly, regarding privacy in security. One, we think that people perceive privacy in status quo the way that they have increased tolerance on breach and privacy. Why is this true? One, people allow big techs like social media companies to have access to their information, specifically from their phone, like their location, to track down their text messages and analyze the posts that they send. They can even access your gallery and contacts. And a lot of people access pseudo psychology tests like MBTI, Facebook quizzes that allows them to give information to big tech companies. We think that people think these kinds of privacy breach is marginal to them. Secondly, 911. Post a lot of terrorism attacks, people justify security checks like patting every part of our body, checking our bags, which is our private belongings, and like show our vaccination card when your health report is obviously should like in pandemic case your vaccination card and whatnot, right? So this is the case where people don't care anymore whether or not they feel safe, but they know that are physically safe from these checks, even though it breaches their privacy. Lastly, the competitive is without the technology is that the tools policemen and agents use on ground is much worse because the intrusiveness of it. One, they are already prepared with guns and paper spray and whatnot, just in case you refuse to cooperate. This happens a lot in the US when black people are stopped in the streets and don't want to cooperate. They are attacked or intrusively abused or assaulted because they don't want to cooperate. This is much more intrusive and dangerous. Secondly, if policemen actually follow you around to gather information specifically, in comparison to CCTV, you will be much more uncomfortable knowing that a person is literally following you. Compare this with knowing that police departments are tracking you down from your camera or CCTV. You probably would feel fine because Facebook is already doing that. Thirdly, it is even if it is a huge violation of privacy and people actually take into account these kinds of things, in the level of priorities, the direct physical security is the most brightest one, especially in areas with high crime rates. If opposition says that most likely this is not the case, we argue that this probably can be the case in areas with low crime rates where people care about their privacy more. So we argue that in areas with high crime rates, there is a unique need for people to actually feel safe, to actually be safe, rather than feeling safe. Because feeling safe is rather not a very significant feeling anymore, especially when they're already used to living around drug cartels, living around mass shootings. What they want is an actually tangible change and not the feeling or pseudo change that happens just because the policemen are not breaching their privacy through this technology. We're so proud to propose.